There is a version of history where humans never made it. Not because of disease, not because of war, but because of something so ancient and so obvious that almost no one ever thinks about it. Every single night, for hundreds of thousands of years, your ancestors walked into a world that was actively trying to kill them. Not through bad luck, not through accident, but by design. Because the night is not neutral. The night is an asymmetric system, and it was not built for us. We are not nocturnal. Our eyes gather almost no light in darkness. Our movement is clumsy and loud. Our senses degrade rapidly past a few meters. And we share this planet with creatures that are the opposite of all of that. Creatures that evolved over millions of years to hunt, to track, and to close the distance in complete darkness without making a sound. For most of human history, every night was a countdown. And yet here we are. So the real question, the one nobody asks, is this: how did a species as physically limited as ours survive hundreds of thousands of nights in a world that was designed to erase us? The answer will change the way you think about what it means to be human. And it starts not with daylight, it starts with darkness. Darkness is not simply the absence of light. It is a competitive advantage, and it belongs to something other than us. Large carnivores, the hyenas, the big cats, the wolves, are not just bigger and stronger. They are architecturally optimized for low-light environments. Their retinas contain a reflective layer that amplifies incoming light and effectively doubles their visual resolution in darkness. Their auditory systems can isolate the sound of a single footstep across distances that would make it invisible to a human. Their movement is adapted for near-total silence on multiple terrain types. They don't simply hunt at night, they own the night. A human moving through open darkness is not simply less capable than these animals. They are exposed in every direction at once. They are detectable from distances far beyond their own perception. They cannot hear what is already hearing them, they cannot see what is already seeing them, and they cannot outrun what is already closing in. Archaeological evidence and modern field studies of predator behavior in sub-Saharan Africa converge on the same conclusion. Early humans outside of protected conditions after dark were not competitors in the nocturnal ecosystem. They were prey items, they were the thing being hunted, and the pressure this created was not minor, it was existential. It operated at the species level every single night for hundreds of thousands of years. Avoidance became the dominant strategy. Movement after sunset dropped to near zero. Exposure was minimized. Bodies pressed together in whatever shelter could be found. But avoidance is not survival. Avoidance is delay. And for a species that needed something entirely different to exist, not just to hide, but to think, to transmit, to build, delay was never going to be enough. The difference between humans and every other animal on this planet may have started not in a savanna, not in a cave, not in a moment of daytime ingenuity, but after sunset, in the decisions made under pressure of total darkness. And the first decision that changed everything was not a thought, it was a flame. What changed the equation was not evolution. The body did not grow night vision, the muscles did not grow silent. Biology stayed exactly the same. What changed was engineering. Controlled fire did something that had never happened in the history of life on this planet. It created a zone where the physical rules of the environment no longer fully applied. Within a radius of roughly 30 feet, predator advantages began to collapse. Light destroyed concealment, heat distorted scent trails, movement became visible to the prey instead of only to the hunter. The sensory asymmetry that made darkness lethal was, inside that circle, reversed. This was not a tool in the conventional sense. A spear extends a capability. A fire replaced an entire set of conditions. It was the first environmental override in the biological record, a deliberate alteration of the operating parameters of survival itself. Inside the fire boundary, the probability of living through the night increased dramatically. Outside it, nothing had changed. The predators were still there. The darkness was still there. The rules were still the rules. But inside that light, inside that heat, a new space had been created. one that belonged entirely to humans. For the first time in evolutionary history, a species that was physically weaker than its apex predators had carved out a territory where it was no longer prey. That moment repeated every night, across thousands of generations, on every continent humans would eventually reach, is where the human story begins, its real departure from every other animal on this planet. Not a departure built on strength, a departure built on a circle of light in the middle of the dark. But fire did not only protect bodies, it did something far more profound. It restructured time itself. Before controlled fire, the functional human day ended at sunset. The hours of darkness belonged to stillness, to hiding, to the biological holding pattern of waiting for morning. There was simply nothing else available. The environment outside the perimeter was lethal, and there was no perimeter. After fire, those hours became accessible. 2 to 4 additional hours of usable, active time were added to every single human day. That number sounds modest until you think about what it compounds to across thousands of generations, tens of millions of additional hours of protected, active cognition accumulated across the span of early human development. Think about what that means. For the first time in the 4 billion year history of life on Earth, a species had extended its active cognition beyond the constraints of natural daylight. Every other animal that had ever lived remained bound to the cycle it was born into, active when the sun permitted, dormant when it did not. Humans stepped outside that cycle, not through biological mutation, not through anatomical change, but through the deliberate control of light itself. And more important than the quantity of time was its quality. Daytime hours are consumed by what they have always been consumed by: hunting, gathering, moving, maintaining. Every action is downstream of immediate survival. The environment is active and demanding, and the human mind must remain reactive and present. There is no slack in the system. The hours after sunset, inside the fire boundary, were different in kind. The immediate survival demands had been suspended. The environment was stable. The perimeter held. And for the first time in human history, something became available that had never been available before: unstructured time. Time with no predator at the door. Time without the next task already screaming for attention. Time that belonged entirely to thought. Fire did not just protect the body at night. It gave the human mind somewhere to go. And what the human mind did with that space is why you are sitting here right now, thousands of years later, capable of understanding the question being asked. What happened in that time is one of the most consequential developments in the history of our species, and it did not require a single genetic mutation. Observations of contemporary hunter-gatherer societies, groups that still live under conditions broadly similar to those of our ancestors, reveal a consistent and striking pattern. Daytime conversation is almost entirely practical. It is about food, water, movement, threat, logistics, coordination. It is communication in service of immediate survival. Direct, transactional, necessary. But at night, around fire, something shifts. The conversation detaches from the present. It moves backward into memory, forward into anticipation, and outward into imagination. Stories about distant events, dangerous animals, rival groups, unknown landscapes, and invisible forces begin to dominate. In documented studies of nighttime communication around fire in these societies, over 80% of conversation becomes narrative-structured stories with characters, causality, and consequence. This is not entertainment. It is something far more important than entertainment. Storytelling is a simulation engine. When a story describes a dangerous animal behaving in a particular way, every person listening is running a model of that danger without being exposed to it. When a story describes a failed hunt or a successful ambush, it transmits tactical knowledge to individuals who were never present. When a story describes the behavior of an unseen enemy or the geography of an unknown place, it extends the perceptual range of every listener far beyond their own direct experience. Fire created the time, narrative filled it, And inside that combination, the human mind began doing something no other animal's brain had ever done at scale. It began running simulations of futures that had not happened yet, and sharing those simulations with others who could run them further, refine them, and pass them on. Without the night system, this cognitive leap may simply not have occurred. The time was not available, the safety was not available. The biological conditions for extended group cognition did not exist in daylight. The fire circle did not just protect early humans from predators. It may have been the literal birthplace of the kind of mind we now call human. The implications of this shift are almost impossible to overstate. An animal that reacts to danger is always one step behind it. An animal that can model danger, that can run scenarios, anticipate outcomes, and share those simulations with others, gains a temporal advantage that no amount of physical strength can overcome. It is always one step ahead, not because of better senses, but because of better prediction. And the fire circle made this collective. Each individual brought different memory, different experience, different interpretation to the group. The elder who remembered the flood season 30 years ago, the hunter who understood the movement patterns of prey across terrain no one else had seen, the young man who had survived an encounter that everyone else only heard described. Each of them contributed a piece of a model that no single mind could hold alone. The group, gathered around the fire, became something genuinely new in evolutionary history, a distributed cognitive system, a shared brain made of individual memories and narratives, capable of holding and processing far more information than any single member could carry. And, unlike any individual brain, this system did not die when one of its members died. It persisted, it accumulated, it grew across generations in a way that no biological adaptation ever could. This is where human dominance does not simply begin. This is where it becomes structurally inevitable, because you cannot outpredict a collective intelligence with individual strength. You cannot outmaneuver a species that has already run the scenario in narrative form before the scenario has occurred. The fire circle was not just protection, it was a thinking machine. And it ran every single night, for thousands of years, accumulating a cognitive library that no other species on Earth had any mechanism to build. But the night system extended beyond what happened around the fire. It continued inside the body itself, in a biological architecture that most modern humans have entirely forgotten. For the vast majority of human history, sleep was not a single, uninterrupted block. It was segmented. Humans would descend into deep sleep shortly after darkness, and the fire's warmth took hold, then surface naturally after 4 to 5 hours, remain awake in a state of quiet, low stimulation consciousness for an hour or more, and then descend into a second sleep phase before dawn arrived. This was not insomnia. It was not disruption. It was a biological response to environmental conditions that had remained stable for hundreds of thousands of years. Historical written records from medieval Europe describe this pattern routinely and without pathology. A French physician in the 16th century referenced the hours between first sleep and second sleep as a recognized and expected part of the night. Modern laboratory experiments that remove artificial light from subjects for several weeks consistently show the same pattern re-emerging spontaneously, as though the body has been waiting the entire time for permission to return to what it actually is. The segmented sleep structure was not an accident of ancient life. It was a built feature, one that aligned the human body's rest and waking cycles with the structure of darkness itself. And like every other component of the night system, it was not passive. It was doing something. The night was not a gap between days. It was a system, and every layer of the body was calibrated to run it. The period between the two sleep phases is where the night system becomes most remarkable. This is not ordinary wakefulness. Hormonal analysis of individuals in this state shows a specific and significant elevation of prolactin, a neurological compound associated with states of calm, open awareness, and reduced defensive processing. People who have experienced this interval, either through historical accounts or modern sleep research, consistently describe it in similar terms: a feeling of unusual clarity, of emotional spaciousness, of mental stillness that is difficult to access at any other time of day or night. In this window, the brain appears to engage in a process of deep integration. The events of the previous day are consolidated, not merely stored. Emotional experiences are processed without the pressure of immediate response. Connections form between ideas and memories that the conscious, task-oriented daytime mind never had the bandwidth to find. Problems that seemed intractable in daylight sometimes resolve themselves in this interval without any deliberate effort at all. This was not wasted time. In biological terms, it may have been some of the most productive time in the human day, a low-noise processing environment built directly into the architecture of nightly rest, firing on a schedule the body kept for hundreds of thousands of years without anyone asking it to. The full night system, then, operated simultaneously on multiple levels. The fire created physical safety and temporal extension. The narrative sessions created shared cognitive models. The segmented sleep created biological consolidation. And the interval between sleep phases created individual reflection and integration, a space where the individual mind digested what the collective mind had produced around the fire. It was not simply a way to survive the night. It was a way to use every hour of it as a complete, layered system for building the kind of minds that could build everything else. And then, in a remarkably short window of time, the system was dismantled, not by an enemy, not by catastrophe, by light. Artificial illumination did not extend the night system. It dissolved the conditions the night system depended on. As controlled lighting spread from early urban gas lamps through the rapid electrification that followed Thomas Edison's commercial lighting networks in the late 19th century, the darkness that had structured human biology for hundreds of thousands of years ceased to exist as a meaningful environmental force. Within a few generations, a blink in evolutionary time, the operating conditions of the human night were gone. The melatonin cascade that governed the transition into sleep shifted later and later. The natural cue to wind down the deepening of darkness, the cooling of temperature, the quieting of the world was replaced by artificial brightness that told the brain it was still afternoon. Hours after the sun had set, the body kept waiting for a signal that no longer came. Sleep compressed into a single phase. The natural wake period between first and second sleep disappeared. The prolactin-rich interval, with its unusual cognitive qualities, was collapsed into unconsciousness or replaced by anxiety about being awake in the middle of the night. The narrative sessions around fire were replaced by passive consumption of broadcast information. The collective thinking machine was fragmented into millions of individuals absorbing content alone, in silence, from separate screens. We did not upgrade the night system. We replaced it with something that performed none of its functions while eliminating all of its conditions. Fire had added structure to the night. Artificial light removed structure without putting anything in its place. But here is what makes this more than a story about sleep hygiene or screen time. We did not just lose darkness. We lost a system that shaped how the human mind was built to operate. The quiet, the narrative, the interval, the collective processing, the biological rhythms tuned across hundreds of thousands of years to run on the absence of light. All of it depended on conditions that are now almost impossible to find. And the cost of that loss is something we are only beginning to understand, not as a disruption of modern wellness, but as a severance from the deepest architecture of what it means to be human. Today, billions of people live inside environments where the night no longer enforces any of its original rules, but the body remembers rules that the environment has stopped keeping. The tendency to wake in the middle of the night and lie there in quiet restlessness, the difficulty falling asleep despite exhaustion, the sense that the mind becomes strangely clear in the small hours when every logical instinct says it should be dark and still. These are not random failures of modern living. They may be the residual signals of a system that once governed survival at the species level, signals that are still firing because the underlying architecture was never changed. It was only interrupted. For hundreds of thousands of years, humans did not conquer the night. they built a system inside it. A system of physical protection and temporal extension, of collective intelligence and individual processing, of biological rhythm and narrative simulation. A system that was layered, redundant, and deeply effective. And there is a case to be made, a serious one, that without this system, humans would likely not exist as a dominant species. Not because of any single factor, but because the entire stack depended on each other. The fire created the safety created the time created the narrative created the collective mind created the cognitive distance between humans and every other animal that has ever lived. Remove any layer of that system and the architecture collapses. Remove the night that the system was built inside, and there was no system to begin with. We did not become human during the day. We became human in the dark, around fire, in stories, in silence. In the stillness between sleep phases, when the mind was clear and no predator could reach us, and the world for just a few hours belonged entirely to thought. The next time you wake in the middle of the night in silence, in that brief moment when the world feels paused and your mind feels unexpectedly clear, do not reach for your phone. Just lie there. Let the interval do what it was built to do. You may not be experiencing a malfunction. You may be experiencing the last living fragment of a system that once determined whether your species survived at all. If this kind of deep dive into the hidden systems that built human civilization is what you're here for, subscribe to Prehistoric Shadows. Every episode, we go further back and further in.